You're listening to Exposed by the So Cultured podcast.
We're your hosts,
Liv, Yaz,
and Taz.
three girls with a passion for science and tech.
Yep, and welcome to our thrilling new series.
This series, we are taking you on a journey to uncover the truth behind your fave TV shows and movies.
From the intergalactic adventures of Star Wars to the monstrous depths of the Meg.
And the chilling scenarios of zombie apocalypses.
Join us as we question whether these plots could ever happen in real life.
And reveal the scientific inaccuracies hidden on our screens.
And don't worry, we will still be dishing out the laboraTEA this season with some even crazier listener stories than ever before.
So grab your popcorn for a side of piping hot laboraTEA.
Before we get into it, remember that all opinions are our own and all our listener stories are alleged.
And now let's get into this week's episode of Exposed.
Hello and welcome back to today's episode of So Cultured. If you missed last week, this season is called Exposed, where we dissect your favourite TV shows and movies and actually determine how scientifically accurate they are. If you missed last week, we spoke all about The Last of Us, which was super interesting. But just before we delve into today's episode, if you listen on Spotify, don't forget on every episode we put a question box and a poll. So please get involved as we love seeing your responses. And with that out of the way, Liv, have you got a question for us this week?
Oh my God, yes, I have missed my question. So if you are a brand new listener, then you won't know this, but in every intro, I ask the girls a question and nothing is changing this season. I do have a question and it is related to TikTok. Yaz, I know you don't watch TikTok, but I have been watching this guy on TikTok and I hope maybe Taz or one of the listeners know who this is. But there's this guy on TikTok called The Wandering Beard. And basically he just tells stories about animal attacks, which is pretty brutal, but he will literally tell stories about people being killed or attacked by like different animals. So the question is, what animal would you guys least like to be killed by? Because I've heard about a lot of different animals and their methods of potentially killing you, and it's pretty savage.
There are probably some wild ways that you can die from animal attacks.
Honestly,
But obviously,
you would not believe it.
If you don't follow my page on Instagram, last year I had a conference in San Diego and I tried to snorkel seeing the leopard sharks and I got stung by a stingray. So the barb cut my foot and I had a panic attack. It was like the worst experience. And obviously stingrays can be seen as like quite bad. They're really important for the environment ecosystem, but that was kind of like a first contact. Do you know what I mean? It was like, actually I've experienced that, so I feel like that could have killed me, but maybe that's not the worst way you could die, or like the worst animal.
That is
I don't know.
traumatic.
What would yours be?
Well, I'm thinking maybe something venomous like a snake or like a spider that's like highly venomous and you just
really
like,
do you think that would
die.
be the worst? I don't think that would be the worst because like you get bit, but then it's like it's all natural, whereas like if you get attacked by a lion, like imagine it's literally digging its claws and it's ripping flesh out of you, like,
Or like a bear?
it's
that's
so
wild.
savage.
But then I think like the shock just takes over at that point. You know what I mean? Like I think you'll have so much adrenaline that you're just like, what the actual hell is going on? Whereas if you get like bitten by a snake where there's no cure or something, then you just have to like endure like a slow, painful death.
I guess. Oh gosh, that is actually a good point. And then like with a like bear or a lion or something, for the most part it's over quite quickly. Whereas I don't know, how quickly does like some snake venom kill you? I actually don't know.
Probably sort of quickly. That's not even a real response.
That's
answer,
a really
is
good
it?
answer. Thanks.
Sort
Thanks
of
for that,
really
Yaz.
quickly.
Sounded so confident as well.
But Liv, what would yours be?
My answer is very straight up, and you guys know I used to work in a zoo, and every single person who worked in the zoo said the worst animal to get out would be the chimps, hands down, because they would literally rip your limbs off. And I actually watched a TikTok from The Wandering Beard where he was talking about, well, he's done several on chimp attacks, and they are unbelievably savage. Like, it's so bad. They will literally rip your face off. It's so
Yeah.
bad because they're just so
Wow.
strong.
True.
So
And they can get quite like, well, I want to say maybe they get aggressive, but I don't know.
yeah, chimps are like very aggressive, like when, you know, when they want to be.
I don't see chimps as scary, but like a silverback gorilla, that would be absolutely terrifying.
Oh,
Like
God,
with their
don't.
massive teeth and stuff.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
oh, no
that's a good
way.
point.
I feel like chimps are just superhumans, and a lot of people don't actually realize how brutal they are. But yeah, you're right. Just
Mm,
gorillas, any apes in general, to be honest. And actually,
yeah.
today's discussion is going to be all about apes because we are going to be covering Planet of the Apes. So let's get into it.
Can't wait.
Ooh,
Planet of the Apes is the longest running American sci fi film series, and it has grossed a total of £2 billion or $2 billion worldwide, which is
Wow.
insane.
Mm.
The Planet of the Apes franchise explores the rise of intelligent apes and the decline of human civilization. So it spans several films, with the original movie being in 1968, and it's now continued with a
Mm.
modern reboot series. The
Mhm.
original film that was released in 1968 basically is about an astronaut called George Taylor and his crew. And basically, they crash land on a mysterious planet in the distant future where they discover a society where intelligent apes, gorillas, orangutans, and chimpanzees basically dominate over humans.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
George Taylor, with the help of two chimpanzees, basically uncover a really shocking secret about the planet, where it is actually a post-apocalyptic Earth where a nuclear catastrophe has destroyed human civilization and allowed apes to rise to power. The newer movies, which you might know as like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes or Rise
Mm.
of the Planet of the Apes, they're basically just like
Mhm.
a rebooted series of that original film. And today we're going to be focusing mainly on the Rise of the Planet of the Apes film, which was released in 2011. And that's like the most well known Planet of the Apes. So let's start by getting into the plot.
Oh my god, yes, please, because I've definitely seen one of the films, but I didn't know how many there actually are, and I can't really remember. So maybe I did watch the 2011 film when it came out, because that was a long time ago. So
Mhm.
yes, please.
So, one of the first characters that we meet in the film is a wild chimpanzee called Bright Eyes, who lives in the West African jungle along with her mates Alpha and the rest of her chimpanzee troop. So one day, Bright Eyes is marching through the undergrowth with the rest of her kind when all of a sudden a flock of birds scatters in the skies above, startling the chimps into a sudden halt. When suddenly they were ambushed by attacking poachers. So Bright
Hmm.
Eyes manages to escape some traps that caught some of her pack, but eventually she falls into a trap and she is captured. Now, while the poachers were taking her away, she screamed to a few chimps in her pack that avoided capture, and then she was shipped over to Genesis Laboratories in San Francisco for experimental research.
Okay, yeah, this is actually ringing a bell now. I think I have watched this. I'm getting like flashbacks of the film
Yeah,
as you're talking. So yeah,
it was a sad start to the film, to be honest.
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, so Bright Eyes is taken to, like I just mentioned, Genesis Laboratories, and this is where we meet kind of one of the main characters of the film, Will Rodman, who is played by James Franco. Now, Will is a scientist working at a San Francisco biotech company, and that is Genesis Laboratories. And he is basically working on trying to develop a cure for Alzheimer's disease. And in the movie,
Hmm.
Will's father actually has Alzheimer's, and Will
Yeah.
like cares and lives with his dad, which I think is really cute because like, you know,
Mhm.
his dad has it and he obviously feels really passionate about like working on it. So I think that's kind of just like a nice little nugget in the film. So
Mhm.
specifically, Will is developing a drug called ALZ-112, which is designed to repair brain cells through a combination of genetic and biochemical mechanisms to potentially cure Alzheimer's. So
Mhm.
during Will's research, one of his test subjects was actually Bright Eyes, and he basically gave Bright Eyes, like I said, this drug ALZ-112, and basically saw that she exhibited significant cognitive improvement after being treated with this drug. So what they saw basically is not only is the drug curing the Alzheimer's, but it's actually also making them extremely clever.
Hold
Now,
on,
at
pause,
this,
sorry. So when they're doing this testing, did Bright Eyes actually have Alzheimer's? Or
yeah, that's a really good question. So Bright Eyes herself didn't actually have Alzheimer's, but
oh, okay.
chimps and apes actually can get Alzheimer's. There is scientific evidence to show that they do, but the
Oh, damn,
actual
okay.
test subjects that they were working on didn't have Alzheimer's. So I tried to figure out how, if they explain anywhere in the movie or anywhere about how the drug actually works, but they don't. I think basically they're
Typical.
basing it, yeah. I think basically they're basing it off of the fact that it can produce like new neural cells and just enhance cognitive abilities. So like whether it actually cures Alzheimer's or it just makes you smarter and kind of like alleviates some of the symptoms. I don't know, like it improves memory, it improves like problem solving skills, which are all things that if you have Alzheimer's, you know, you lose the ability to do. So I don't really know.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe they didn't really think this through properly. It was just like cool for the storyline rather than actually like scientifically sound.
Yeah, I think so. But then again, I mean, if they started going into how the drug works, I think most people would be like, oh, this is a boring movie. I'm tuning out. So
Yeah, good
I
point.
think surface level science is kind of sometimes what they need.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like it is what it is. It does what it does, so that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, at the start of the film, Will is about to give a really important presentation all about the success of ALZ-112. So he's giving it to the chimp, sees that it works, and he's basically about to present it to the board of directors of this biotech company because he wants to get funding to basically continue research on this drug. Now, during this presentation, Bright Eyes becomes agitated and aggressive. And the reason is because she has secretly just given birth to a little baby chimp and she thinks that her baby's in danger. So she's just like going
Being
mad.
protective, mama. That's
Yeah.
cute.
Tragically, Bright Eyes is shot during the incident. And the board of directors decide there and then to cut funding of ALZ-112. So the research program is basically ordered to euthanize all the test subjects due to safety concerns. So in a less wordy way, basically they're ordered to kill all of the chimps.
Mm.
In a moment of compassion, though, Will discovers the infant chimp, Caesar. This is the baby chimp that Bright Eyes has just given birth to. It's
Cute.
hidden away in the lab, and Will decides to secretly take Caesar home to save his life. And at home, Caesar thrives under Will's care, rapidly developing both intellectually and emotionally. So he keeps on giving him this drug. And he actually learns to communicate with Will through sign language, surpassing the cognitive abilities of typical chimpanzees. Meanwhile, Will is continuing his research, driven by his personal connection to both Caesar and also, obviously, his father's condition. And he discovers that while ALZ-112 initially shows promise in treating Alzheimer's, its effect basically diminishes over time as the human immune system develops antibodies against the drug. To overcome this, Will develops a new and more potent strain of the drug called ALZ-113, which is even more effective in basically making the chimps smarter.
I was going to ask how scientifically accurate is that if there was a drug that we could use, say, to treat Alzheimer's, and then your body producing antibodies against it? Like, is that quite typical in terms of other drugs that we have? Do we know anything like about how that works?
If it's like a molecule kind of based drug, then no. But I think it is like if it's like a gene based therapy drug where they use like I don't know, like a virus vector or something, then yeah, you could have an immune response against the virus vector.
Yeah, and it is a virus vector.
Oh, okay.
So that is scientifically accurate then. That could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so he's made ALZ-113. It's a lot better and
Yeah.
it makes the apes even cleverer. But the unintended consequence of ALZ-113 is catastrophic. Basically, when the drug mutates and becomes airborne, This is the plot of the film, by the way. So the drug mutates and it becomes airborne, and it spreads among the apes, and it causes a new pandemic dubbed the simian flu. And then apes that are exposed to ALZ113 basically just get really, really clever. And the simian flu basically ends up spreading globally. It causes this huge pandemic and basically just leads to like the decline of humans. Loads of humans are dying.
That's actually kind of crazy how we've gone from like an Alzheimer treatment to a global pandemic. Like, that seems pretty far-fetched to me. So like, does it delve into, I guess, the science of why this would have happened?
Yeah, it does. So yeah, as I mentioned, like I was really confused in the film. I was like, I don't get how an Alzheimer's drug has apparently just started this whole global pandemic. Like I
Yeah,
don't
can
get
things
it.
just become airborne? Like, I don't even know how that works.
Yes. So this brings us on to the first thing that we've got to talk about, or the first like scientific inaccuracy, if you like. So as we just said, the simian flu starts out as ALZ113, which is a virally delivered gene therapy for Alzheimer's disease. So
Mhm.
Will basically designed a declawed retrovirus to insert the therapeutic genes into brain cells. Now, retroviruses are the category of virus that HIV belongs to, not the flu. But retroviruses don't tend to be transmitted through airborne droplets, which is how, like I said, the apes and humans are first exposed to the virus in the film. So, if I'm right, retroviruses typically require intimate contact, like sharing needles or like unprotected sex, childbirth, or anything like that to hop from person to person. So, normally they're not transmitted airborne. Is that right, Taz?
Yeah, that's right. And also, yeah, going from that kind of transmission to like an airborne transmission is not gonna happen,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, right, like the virus is like in the blood, and like retroviruses or like HIV can affect like your white blood cells and stuff. So if it's
Mhm.
like directed towards things like that, it's not gonna go to your like respiratory tract and be excreted that way and then into like
Mm-hmm.
airborne particles, and it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
suddenly change how it infects people just because it's suddenly airborne,
Mhm.
right? So even if you were to breathe in HIV particles, you wouldn't necessarily, or you wouldn't get HIV, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Although I did
Yeah.
read about one exception, which is a sheep retrovirus, and I can't even
mm,
pronounce what it's called. Called just I can't pronounce that. JAAARSI. I'm not even gonna bother. But basically, there is actually a sheep retrovirus that spreads via airborne droplets from sheep to sheep. So like maybe it's not entirely impossible, but I feel like it would have been good if they had picked up on that, like or
Mhm.
like kind of reference that in the film to make it more believable. I don't know. Have you heard about
mm,
that sheep retrovirus, Taz?
no. But I would say another thing that's, I guess, is kind of like biologically relevant is that usually we see pandemics arise from a new sort of host animal being infected and then that jumping to humans. So like it acquires some mutations by jumping to like a different host animal, and then it goes to
Yeah.
humans because it's managed to acquire those mutations. So that kind of makes sense
Mhm.
biologically when it comes to viruses. But like what doesn't make sense is that you're using like viral gene therapy, um because usually in those scenarios you take out the part of like the virus that makes it a virus, so it can't like
Yeah.
replicate and
Mhm.
stuff and produce more viral particles. It's like it just goes into your cells, affects your genes so that you express whatever you've put in, and then that's it. It doesn't
Mhm.
reproduce. So
I don't know, but the other point is like when the drug started, the simian flu, it was like so freaking quick. Like all of a sudden, everyone is dying, and although retroviruses are prone to mutating, it is quite unlikely for a virus to accrue
mm,
enough mutations in just a few years to suddenly start rapidly spreading in a population that had previously been immune, let alone to
Mhm.
produce
mm,
like such radically different, unrelated symptoms in different people.
yeah. Also, can I just say as well, like, it doesn't really make sense that it like affects just the chimps and not humans as well, because they're like very similar. Because obviously, COVID-19, let's use that as an example, that infects
Mm.
mammals in general, like so many different mammals, like
Yeah.
dogs, cats, deers.
Oh my God, yeah, because I remember everyone was like, don't let your cats out because they're going to get COVID and they're going to bring COVID home.
No, that's
Yeah.
a good point.
Oh.
So yeah, basically the science behind the biggest part of the storyline, like the fall of humans, is not completely impossible because obviously we know about the sheep retrovirus, but also basically is impossible given our current understanding of virology and epidemiology.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it does seem a bit far-fetched, but it makes for good TV,
Mm-hmm.
like
For
good
sure.
cinematic
Mm-hmm.
drama. But obviously you've explained bits that are wrong with the film, like scientifically inaccurate. But earlier you mentioned how Will was able to communicate with the chimps via like sign language. And I'm sure I've seen a video, I think the ape died recently, or maybe like years ago. I actually don't know. But there was one, I used to watch these YouTube videos of
Mm-hmm.
this ape doing sign language. So like, isn't that like that's a true thing that can
Mm-hmm.
happen?
Yeah. When I originally watched the film, I was like, yeah, no, that wouldn't be possible. But it actually is. And even in the film, Caesar actually then goes on to teach sign language to the other apes, which
Yeah.
I thought is really cool. And yeah, like I said, I thought that seemed really far fetched, but it's actually totally feasible. So, one
Mm.
of the most famous examples, which is perhaps who you were watching on
Hmm.
YouTube, Yaz, is a chimp called Washo, who is a chimp that was basically raised by two
Hmm.
psychologists in the 1960s and 70s. And she was not only the first chimpanzee to learn American Sign Language, but also demonstrated an impressive ability to actually communicate with her human caregivers using sign
Wow,
language.
yeah.
So by the time she was 3 years old, she had learned to use over 100 different signs, and she could even identify objects, request things that she
That's
wanted, and
mad.
even actually formulate simple sentences. And her ability to combine signs creatively to express new ideas. So basically, like, she actually ended up coming up with new words for things. So instead of calling a swan or like signing a swan, she called it a water bird, which I think is absolutely adorable. So like she
Oh.
would look at a swan and then like sign water bird. So she was like literally
Oh.
coming up with new ways to explain or like new names for things, which I think is just absolutely
That is
adorable. Like I was like, oh my
cute.
gosh.
Because yeah, how would you know
Yeah.
swan? Do you know what I
Um
mean? Like,
That's
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah. Well, she obviously hadn't been
yeah,
taught it yet, but she had been taught water and bird. So she managed to put them together to
that's
describe the
amazing.
swan, which yeah, I feel like really like
Mm.
emphasizes her ability to like obviously grasp individual
Hmm.
signs, but also her understanding of abstract concepts and the ability to like innovate within the language, which I just think is so cool. So Caesar learning sign language is a scientific accuracy that we
Hmm.
see in the film.
But I guess he didn't need the treatment in order to do that, because he managed to do that. These psychologists managed to do that without it.
Exactly. So they kind of make it seem like within the film he is like has learned sign language because of his enhanced abilities, but actually that's normal, and chimps that haven't had this drug like
Mm.
can do sign language.
One thing I've always wondered as well is like, if humans weren't on Earth, like would chimps end up like how humans are? Because also like in the film, the chimps can talk. So is that like, why can't chimps talk? This is, might be a silly question, but like why can't chimps actually talk in real life
Hmm.
already? Like, and could that be a possibility in the future, like the film?
Yeah, it's not a silly question. So like why non-human primates are unable to speak has been a question that scientists have had for a really long time, and it's long been blamed on their vocal anatomy. So people have already like always said that basically chimps can't imitate human like speech sounds because they don't have the like correct like vocal tracts or vocal muscles to actually do so. So that was kind of what was thought for a really long time, but a recent study actually debunked this theory. So there was an article called Muscles of the Apes, and they found that certain apes do actually possess these muscles. And so another theory surfaced to explain why basically chimps or apes can't speak, and it actually has to do with brain wiring. So non-human primates, although they actually have the muscles needed to make human like speech sounds, they lack the proper neural control of these muscles in their vocal tract, and that's why they're not
Oh.
able to speak. Now, it's also hypothesized that as humans, we may have like some
Mhm.
kind of genetic predisposition to be able to speak. So, for instance, the FOXP2 gene, or the fork head box protein 2 gene, was the first gene identified to play a role in human speech and language development. And that's why it's now known as the language gene. It's located on
Oh.
chromosome 7 and it's expressed in certain cells, including the brain. And mutations of this gene causes speech and language disorder in humans. And the protein product of this is really interesting. The protein product of the human FOXP2 gene is only 2 amino acids different from the chimp FOXP2. So chimps do have
Um,
this gene, but it's just 2 amino acids different.
yeah, it would have like a random mutation maybe just in one amino
Mhm.
acid, or then like the second one would have enabled
Mhm.
us to have speech. But then equally, I
Yeah.
think it's important to note that just because apes don't talk how we do doesn't mean that they don't communicate in their own way, in a
Mhm.
sophisticated way. Like we assume because we're humans that we have the most sophisticated like communication style. But I guess for them, like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like it could still be an effective way for them to communicate. We shouldn't compare just because that's what we know and that's how we communicate and that's how we see the world.
I do think we have the most sophisticated language, though, to be honest. Like, that's how we've
I think
managed
so.
to, like, I guess, get where we are today. I think that it all comes down to communication between
Yeah,
other
but what I'm
humans.
saying is like apes, for how they're living, like would they need that level of communication? Like they obviously have certain communication they can do.
I think the point is they, when you say like they're living, but they are living like that because they can't. That's the
Mm,
whole idea of the film, right? Is
yeah.
Yeah,
like
that.
actually chimps, like apes, are so much stronger than us. They're faster than us.
Mm-hmm.
They're cleverer than us when it comes to like catching prey. They can do things like we do. They can start fires. They can do all of these
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
The only thing that they can't do is talk. So really, that's what sets us apart from chimps. Like,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
did you know what I mean? So
So in the
the
film, it's
whole
like that's how then they like can rise up and
right, because as soon
dominate.
as they start to learn to talk with each other, they get, they dominate more and more, and they just
Yeah.
become stronger, better. So, like, if chimps could talk, yeah, they'd probably be ruling over us.
Based on that, though, I would be so intrigued to see if they could do like gene therapy to like introduce those like 2 amino acids in
Hmm.
that particular gene to see if it makes them
Oh, mad.
able to like talk more
Yeah,
than like chimps currently do. It's probably related to more than just one gene, right? But like it would
Yeah.
be really interesting to see if you could do
because I was
that.
about to say, so obviously we know this gene is involved in human speech, but I don't know if we actually know how it's involved in human speech. So, for
Mm,
example, does it allow us to
Mm,
have fine control over these muscles in our vocal tract, and that's what causes human speech? In which case,
mm.
if you was introduced this mutation into the chimps, like yes, they would probably be able to talk, but if it has some kind of other effect, then maybe not. I don't know. Because, like you said, there's definitely other genes that are involved in human speech.
but
Hmm.
then
So,
hear me out, right? I'm just gonna talk like I normally do because I don't know what I'm trying to formulate here. But
okay, go
even
for it.
if apes could talk and they had the ability to, would their brain like capacity or like how they actually think and their thought processes be the same as us? So would we actually expect to have the same kind of conversations that we do, or would their brains like
I think
be
it would be like extremely different because I mean, we're a product of thousands of years of evolution and like societal, cultural impact as well. And yeah,
exactly, yeah,
like you
yeah.
say, like we get up and we switch on a kettle, they don't do that. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think their language or like their speech would be extremely different to us. And it would be really interesting, like how would they formulate sentences? Like,
Mm.
I mean, obviously that chimp who learnt sign language, she said like water bird, but ultimately like her understanding of sign language and things like that, that's been influenced by humans. So yeah, I think it would be very different.
Yeah, and speaking of like speech and things of like how it's quite personified, or like it's become this human, like it's relatable to
Humanized.
humanized, is that the word?
Mm.
Another thing that I found that was like really, really odd was that the apes then actually like walked on their hind legs.
Mm-hmm.
It was giving like Animal Farm vibes of like,
Animal Farm.
you know,
What's
have you
that?
never read that? Did you not read it at school?
It's
Oh
ringing a bell.
yeah.
It's ringing a bell.
And it was like all these
Hated
animals.
that.
Yeah, that was like quite a political book, but it was just about how the animals were
That is ringing a
becoming
bell.
more humanized, I guess. But yeah, they were literally on their hind legs in the film. That is quite scary. And can that actually happen? Like,
Yeah.
do apes do that?
Yeah, that scared me as well. Like, imagine a walking, talking chimp. Absolutely not. This is what I'm saying.
And they'd be like really tall,
They
right?
would dominate us because we would be so petrified of them. Like, we would do whatever they told us to do. Like, do you know what I mean? So they would dominate. Anyway, so like walking on hind legs. The term is actually bipedalism, and it is a defining characteristic of humans. So again, this is another thing that sets us apart from apes like chimpanzees, orangutans, or whatever, because they primarily move on all fours using their knuckles. In reality, while apes like chimpanzees and gorillas are capable of occasional bipedal walking, so they can walk on their hind legs, usually they can only do this for short distances or when they're carrying something. So it's not their preferred method of walking, if you like, because their bodies are adapted for quadrupedalism, which is the opposite of bipedalism, where they move efficiently on all fours. Chimpanzees, for example, have like longer arms and a more bent posture, which is well suited for knuckle walking and climbing in trees. What are you
Sounds like
laughing
me,
at?
honestly.
Knuckle walking.
Yeah, like long arms and like a
Oh.
bent over posture. That's me.
That's like me and my
Secretly a
posture.
chimp.
Oh my gosh.
Liv thought it was when you said knuckle walking.
Yeah, I was like, what you mean you're walking on your knuckles? Like, what are you talking about, you weirdo? But yeah, the ability to walk upright on two legs like we do as humans requires adaptations in anatomy. So humans have a unique pelvis shape, a curved spine, and more. And these adaptations are absent or less pronounced in non-human apes, making sustained bipedalism challenging for them. So yeah, basically they can stand and even walk on two legs under certain conditions, but if they do it or the idea that they do it for a long period of time, like they show in the films, is unrealistic.
Okay, so I feel like the biggest question is, like, after watching the Planet of the Apes, could that actually happen in the future? Like, is it scientifically sound that it could potentially happen?
Yeah, so I feel like there's some parts of the film, like we've discussed, they're scientifically accurate, but I think the biggest problem is the virus situation. The retrovirus spreading airborne, starting a global pandemic. I think we can throw that out the window and say that that would never happen, which I feel like kind of like throws their whole plot off. But with regards to could apes ever develop human intelligence or the ability to speak, there's two ways that this could potentially happen one day. So, firstly, through natural evolution, and then secondly, through genetic manipulation. So, first, the likelihood of apes evolving human like intelligence through natural processes like evolution is actually still quite low due to several factors. So, as we know, evolutionary pathways are shaped by environmental pressures and the challenges that led to human cognitive abilities, such as complex language and advanced social structures that we have, which chimps or just apes in general don't really have. They're not necessarily applicable to great apes or just apes in general. Even if certain genetic mutations were beneficial for increasing cognitive abilities in ape, the chances of these mutations arising and actually spreading throughout the population are low. So, like, for example, this wouldn't happen because I think we've already discussed the idea that human speech or the ability to speak is probably like polygenic. So even if there was like one chimp that got a mutation in FOXP2, and then all of a sudden they're able to speak. None of the other chimps can speak back to it. So the chances of it like spreading is quite low, unless there was some kind of evolutionary thing that made it so all of the apes were getting this mutation. I don't know. Basically, it's still just quite low. Also, the developmental constraints, including brain development and maturation processes, may not easily accommodate significant increases in cognitive complexity. So basically, like in the film, you know how they all got like super clever really, really quickly. That's just kind of like unrealistic, because like their developmental and like their brain anatomy like basically couldn't handle all of this increased cleverness at once, if that makes any sense. So basically,
Yeah.
any significant advancement in ape intelligence, or basically the only chance of apes suddenly getting very clever, is likely to only occur through genetic manipulation.
Okay, so have there actually been any studies that would look at doing genetic manipulation on apes for this? Surely that's not like normal or right or ethically, like what?
Right, I know. When I started thinking about it, I was like, oh my God, I hope no one's actually doing this, because it will actually turn us into real life Planet of the Apes, because we can't make the chimps clever because we will be screwed. But don't worry, it's not directly been done. However, a handful of studies have resulted in animals like accidentally who are seemingly smarter than they should be. So for example, an MIT study done in 2014 utilized the human FOXP2 gene. This is the gene that we've just discussed. Humans have, it's involved in human speech, and they manipulated it in a group of laboratory mice. And the modified mice obviously didn't start suddenly reciting Shakespeare, but they did show improved intelligence, demonstrated by their greater ability to navigate mazes. This experiment, along with other similar studies, could imply that the enhancement of non-human animal intelligence is inevitable. So it's something that like we could potentially accidentally do, but it's not something that we intentionally pursue, or I hope it's something that we will never intentionally pursue. So that is it for this week's science. But Yaz, can you tell us what film we are going to be covering next week, just in case anyone wants to go ahead and watch it? But as I said last week, remember, you do not need to watch any of these films or series to listen into these episodes. But Yaz, tell us what you're going to be covering.
Yeah, so next week we will be talking all about the scientific accuracies or inaccuracies and exposing The Martian.
Nice. I've actually watched that film, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, it is a good
same.
film. It's a long film though, so if you want to listen
Yeah.
beforehand, make sure you've got 2.5 hours of your day
Oh
to watch
gosh.
it.
Okay, amazing. And with that, I think it's time to move on to the laboratory section of today's episode. So let's get into it.
Girls, I've got some wild tea for this week. And let me also mention that when I went to a conference recently, a lot of people in Europe didn't actually know what the term tea meant, but
Oh,
I
okay.
assumed that was like a whole thing. People knew what
Same, like
tea
I'm dishing
was,
out the
and then
tea.
laboraTEA.
Yeah, and they say
Yeah,
like, what's the tea today? Give me the tea, spill the tea.
yeah. But I guess that's more of a slang term that not everyone knows. So this is just a
Oh.
reminder that if you're new to listening, or even if you've been listening forever and you're like, I still don't really get what laboraTEA is or what tea time is. The tea is, I don't know, what would you
The
explain it as?
goss.
Like
It's the
gossip, just
gossip. It's
goss.
the goss. Yeah.
So it starts by saying, I'm 30, married, and completing my master's in a neuro lab. Our lab includes grad students, fourth year honours thesis students, third year students, second year volunteers, like the whole shebang. And one of the volunteers, a 19-year-old girl, has been working with me since July. She's
Okay.
keen, capable, and smart, and our supervisor assigned her to help me with my
Ooh.
project. Our lab is a relaxed environment where everyone gets along well and interacts socially. But this is where it gets interesting. There have been some concerning incidents with this volunteer. So it now lists like multiple things that this volunteer has done. So
Okay.
it says she sent me a quote unquote accidental nude and text.
What? So wait,
She
what?
left me a drunk voicemail and often texts me while drunk. She frequently comments on how my cologne distracts her. She offered to massage me when I mentioned that I've got a
Oh.
stiff back from doing my work.
Huh?
Okay. It's a bit weird.
Yeah, it's a bit sus, right? During a lunch discussion, oh God, I don't know what it is with this podcast, but there's some fetishes. So it says, during a lunch discussion about foot fetishes, she started placing her bare feet near me and asked if her feet were
Absolutely
cute
not.
enough to sell pics online.
Guys, quick
This can't be-
question. Who here thinks they have cute feet?
No, mine are clapped.
Nah.
Do you think you've got cute feet?
Mine are
I
like just very average.
See, I think
Actually,
I would
probably better than
have
average.
cute feet, but my issue is that my feet are different sizes, and also I have that thing where like my big toe isn't actually my longest toe. See, I think the cutest feet are like a nice gradient, but mine are like
Hmm.
you know what I mean?
Jagged.
So what you're
Jagged.
basically saying is, Liv, is that you don't have cute feet. That's what I'm getting
Yeah.
from the conversation.
It's
So
like
basically, if you were in this
I'm
conversation,
nearly
he would be
yeah.
like, no, you can't sell your feet pics.
Yeah. It's like I'm nearly there, but I'm not quite there.
But girls, this does not stop here. This is actually, I think this might be like a mad story that I don't think I can even read this out. It says,
Oh god.
she has repeatedly mentioned not having a gag reflex.
Oh.
She talks about
It's
a friend who
okay.
has a much older buddy and expresses jealousy. She
Wait.
watches my Instagram stories first and has liked old shirtless photos of me. It then says her friend approached me asking questions about my wife and if we were meaning polyamorous, and mentioned that the volunteer hasn't hooked up with anyone in months. So that was the friends approaching him.
Sorry,
Then
like who asked?
Oh, no. This gets worse. This actually gets worse. It then says, this is like the last thing. She frequently bends over in front of me, fixes my hair or collar, does yoga in the lab, and asks about lab romances. This sounds like something from a film. Like, this can't be real life. This actually
is
gross.
This is harassment, guys. This actually isn't even funny. Like this is straight up harassment, and like he needs to go to HR immediately.
Well,
Yeah.
it has given options in this saying, here's how I handle it. I mention my wife frequently. I'm assuming that's just like, as a reminder, like, I'm married, bro, like, back off. I have one worded her after the quote unquote accidental texts, and I ignore the drunk messages. I decline her massages and invitations to hang out alone. Hold on, did not see that. But okay, hanging out alone. I avoid liking her selfies or thirst traps on Instagram. I play dumb when she makes suggestive comments. I think that's kind of where you're going wrong. Like, you haven't called it out. I discuss how
agree.
inappropriate I would feel in an age gap relationship.
Yeah, which I don't really understand, to be honest, because I kind of feel like, well, 19's not that young. Like, she's just young compared to him, right? So I think it's just, it's old enough to know that what you're doing is kind of like not okay, firstly.
Yeah.
And I also think he's just being like maybe a bit of a wet wipe by just letting her get away with it and like acting naive, because if you have a wife, you should be standing up for your wife, even though she's been very nice and said like just play dumb. You should still be sticking up for your wife and being like, like, I don't think that's really appropriate to do because I'm married and you're quite young. Da, 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 da.
But then is it like roles reversed? Didn't we have
I was
some
literally
other
about to
tea?
say,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, what I think about this is like, if the roles were reversed, we obviously would be like, well, I think I would be like, oh, that's more understanding. I get why a woman would brush that off because of like a male PI or whatever being in a position of power and stuff, and then them just being like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this, I'm just gonna laugh it off. Whereas in this situation, I feel like, I don't know if it is a gender thing or if it's more because he's older and she's younger, maybe he could have more authority to just be like, look, I don't want this. But is that unfair for me to say he should be more stern about it rather than just being like, I get why he's brushing it off?
So is he a postdoc or?
Oh no, it said completing my master's.
So to him, they're actually probably on the same level. So I don't think the power dynamics argument stands. He probably doesn't feel that because they're on the same level. So although he's older, they are in the workplace and he doesn't consider himself in any authority over her. So I disagree, and I think it's purely like, yeah, probably the gender thing. And I think as a man, he probably doesn't recognize that this is sexual harassment. And I feel like my best advice to him would
True.
be, think about if this was your wife in the exact situation and what would you say to her? Because I think
Yeah,
as a
good
man,
point.
it's really easy to be like, oh, my man, like, you still shouldn't put up with it. So if this was your wife and this was a man accidentally sending a dick pic to her, or,
Oh gosh, yeah.
like, um,
Yeah, this accidental nude thing,
or
like,
putting his
that is
feet on her,
actually
like,
wild.
what would you do and what advice would you give to her? And then take that advice and action that yourself, because I think you're just making excuses for her because you're a man and
She's
she's a
young and
woman.
she's
Yeah. But
I think so.
it's not okay. So I think that's,
But
that's my best advice.
it's also the fact that a friend of the volunteer had approached him to be like, "Are you and your wife poly?" Being like, "Then can we have sex?"
That's just such an
That's fucking
inappropriate
wild.
question to be asking at work. Like, are you okay?
Yeah, unless you were actually wanting that and like meeting up outside of work and
Yeah,
doing
but
that,
then
then
just
like
do it with
if
someone
you
you
want that
don't
with your
work
colleague,
with.
exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that. But like, let's not be asking these type of questions or anything of this nature to people we work with. Like, that's
Yeah.
weird.
Also, like, seek advice from like someone that you trust, and maybe if you feel happy like communicating to someone like that at work, because he obviously doesn't want the negative connotations of, like, I don't know, there being a rumor between, like, that maybe insinuates there's something going on between the two of them, and it's like kind of inappropriate because he's like a lot older. So I feel like communication is key to like a trusted person, and just be like, look, this is going on, I feel really uncomfortable about it, I'm not really sure like what to do going forwards. And then maybe it'll escalate to the point where someone will take her away and have a private conversation with her so it's not embarrassing, and just be like, look, they've expressed concern, like, let's nip this in the bud now because it's not funny anymore.
And I also think just one last thing is, like, if you feel comfortable to do so, like, tell her in a roundabout way that she makes you uncomfortable, or tell her to just like chill out. You don't have to do it too seriously. Just be like, hun, chill out, like, stop it, I'm not interested, kind of thing. But maybe you don't feel comfortable to do that. Or
And that's also
when,
okay, isn't it? To like
yeah,
not know
definitely.
how to like bring that up.
Yeah, I also think in season 2, if you look for the episode titled Professor Leaked Text, please go and listen to that discussion, because I feel like that would be really beneficial for you, because we talk all about power dynamics, like all of the unprofessionalism at work, and also people's responses to these kind of situations. Like, maybe you laugh it off and things like that, which I feel like is potentially what you're doing, and that's totally understandable. Like I literally said in that episode, I've been in that situation, I've done the exact same thing. But yeah, I feel like you'll really benefit from listening to that conversation, so definitely look out for that. But we just hope that you manage to get the situation sorted, and we're really sorry that you're experiencing this. And please remember that, like, just because you're a man and she's a woman, like, this is not okay, and you shouldn't have to put up with it.
And don't forget, if you have any stories that you want to share with us, we will always react, whether it is crazy stuff happening in the lab to do with your tech job or anything in STEM. We want to hear. It doesn't have to be the wildest story either. So just like whatever's going on, let us know. And not gonna lie, we're actually dumb, because we always say you can send us your story on our anonymous link, and the anonymous link can be found in our Instagram bio. But like, we're now gonna put it in the episode description so you can access it a lot easier.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
I don't know why we
didn't
made
think
it
of that
so hard
sooner.
for them. We're sorry, guys. So if you have a story, just scroll down to the episode description, click the link and submit it there. And please remember that all of your responses are anonymous. We don't get any of your emails. We don't get any of your details. So we don't know who you are. It's completely anonymous. So go crazy. Okay, and with that rounds off today's episode of Exposed. So like we said, next week we are going to be covering The Martian, and then for next week's laboraTEA section we are, of course, once again introducing something new. You can't tell us we did not keep it fresh for you guys as listeners. So yeah, we will see you guys in next week's episode.
Bye.
See you.
Bye everyone.
You've been listening to the So Cultured podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Make sure you listen in next week for more science and tech updates and the hottest laboraTEA.
You can stay up to date with us in between episodes by following us on Instagram and X at So Cultured Podcast.
See you back here, same time next week.